Hi guys, in this video I'm going to cover VLookup, the VLookup function in Excel, and when that doesn't work you're going to need to use something called index match to do the same sort of looking up functionality. So I'll go over both of those things. So before we get started, go to Excel, vbasequel.com. There's tons of hours of video and you could learn a bunch on Excel and how to do macros and everything you want. Okay, let's get started. So let's go to the main workbook we have. Um, just remember what we're doing in this workbook is we're going over all the Excel functions that there are. So we have data, and over here you could see we are going over logical functions and mathematical functions, all kinds of stuff. So let's continue with this, and now we're going to look at, if we go to the formula tab over here, we're going to look up these lookup functions, and we're going to specifically look at this VLookup function here, right here, and then we're going to see how we can use this index match function to do the same thing. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm going to make this very simple because this is a very simple function, VLookup, and it's not complicated, and it's one of the most important things in Excel. If you're not good at Excel, if you don't know how to do this, you need to know how to do this. It's very critical. So just watch the video. It's very simple. Don't be scared or anything. It's just a lookup function, and let's get started. Okay, so let's say that you're a teacher at a school and you have grades. You want to assign grades to students, and you're gonna give a grade. If someone gets between 50 and 60, you're going to give them an F. Between 60 and 70, you give them a D. 70 and 80, you're going to give them a C. And 80 and 90, you give them, a B. And 80 to 90, you give a B, and then 90, you give an A. Now notice I said there's a range. I said 50 to 60. Because I don't need to specify exactly a range here. I could just make a small table like this, and like I just told you, I want it to be so that if you score above a 50 but below a 60, then you get a F. So that's going to be our main data that we're working with in this video. So we have a score and a grade. That's it. So in Excel, I'm just going to center this. In Excel, what you're going to need to do pretty much all the time is try to match up. Say you have a score, you're going to try to have to match up that score with a grade. So let's do it right here. So let's say that here we go, student score. Let's say that a student gets a 55, and then a 65, and then a 75, and then an 85, and then a 95. Let's say these are student scores here. So we could write, here's our master grading. Sorry, I should have inserted this row before. This is our master grading system. And now we have real data. And we're going to try to match up, what should this student get? They got a 55. Well, they should get an F. But how do we do that in Excel? This happens all the time. So you want to use a function called VLookup. And so to use a function, remember, you just type equals VLookup. And right away, when you type that parentheses, you're going to see this, lookup value. The lookup value is what you want to look up in this table over here. So I want to look up 55. Notice that 55 doesn't need to be over here, and I'll get to that in a second. So the lookup value is going to be 55, so I selected cell E4. And then the next parameter here is table array. It's asking us what table do you want to look up in. So I want to look up in this table, range A4 to B8. That's my table because it has the score here and it has the grade here. So that's the lookup. Now it says over here, what is the column index number? Col index number. What column of this table do you want to have returned? So you look up 55 in this table and it finds it. So now we're going to get to that in a second. And let's say 55 was right here. How does it know what column to return? Is it going to be this column with the grade in it, or is it going to be the column with the score in it? So let's have it return the second column, the column with the grade in it. So I do that, the second column. And now here's a critical part of the VLookup function. It says range lookup. And notice down here it says true approximate match. And then it says false exact match. So let's go over this part with the false exact match, because this is probably 99% of the time when you're going to use VLookup, you're going to use false. So if I just click false, it's going to put the word false here. But you could also put the number 0 here, because remember in Excel, 0 stands for false and 1 stands for true. So I could put 0 here or false here. I'm going to put 0 just because that's how I usually do it. And so here's my function. Here's how it looks. I'm going to look up the value E4, which is 55, in this table, A4 to B8. And then I want the second column of that table. And so let's see what this returns. And then notice this range lookup. Remember, let's go back to this real quick. I said I want to assign the value false, and that means exact match. So what does exact match mean? That means that 55 has to be in this table. So when you put comma 0 as the last parameter, it's going to look for the exact value 55. So if I hit enter here, I get a error message, right? Not a message, I just get an error value, £NA. That stands that there's an error. Why is there an error? Well, it's because there is no 55 in this table. Okay? So how do we get around that? Well, one thing is you may not want to get around that. Maybe you know, in our system here with this grading system, we're going to get around that to use an exact match, or to use an approximate match, which I'll show you in a second. But in the real world, you're probably going to want to have comma 0, because you're going to want to have an exact match of your data. But I want to show you it this way so you see what this comma 0 and what the other way of doing it, the approximate match. Now to do an approximate match, notice if I do comma, then I get the parameters that I could select from pop up again, true and false. So if I click true now, notice the word true is now in there. And true can also be replaced with the number 1, like I said before. So if I do this, I just change this from 0 to 1, I hit enter. Now I get an F, right? So what happened? So now the approximate match that we saw here, this approximate match, that means it's going to look for the smallest number that is, or actually the largest number that is smaller than 55. Okay? And so let's do something like this. If I put 56 in here, I get an NA. So this is how approximate match works when you do a VLookup. It looks for the largest number, or I'm sorry, the smallest number in this range here, that it's the closest number to 55 on the lower end. So it rounds down, basically. It goes down. It looks for a number smaller than 55, and if there is a number there, it picks the biggest one. In our case, it's 50. And it returns the grade, which is in column 2. Remember, column 2 is here. I could return column 1 if I do this. I'll get 50. So this is a good way of seeing what approximate match does. It's gonna look for a lower number, and if it finds it, it's going to return that lower number, the first one it finds. If it doesn't find it, so let's say we have 55.00001, so that's not lower than 55, it's not smaller than 55, we're going to get an NA. So that's what approximate match does. Okay. The other thing that's important here is that I believe, well, let's see, is that these numbers here need to be sorted from lowest to highest. So if I put a high number here, I get an error. Why is that? It's because when you use approximate match, you need to sort them from lowest to highest. Now this is only when you use approximate match. If you do exact match, it doesn't matter. So if I do an exact match, comma 0, I'm getting an NA not because they're not ordered properly. It's because there is no 55 here. If I put 55 here, I get 55. So that's the intricacy of the VLookup function. That's why people get confused about it, and people, it's one of those things in Excel when you first start that, oh, how do you do a lookup? What is this VLookup function? It's because there's weird things like this with this last parameter. Everything else is pretty straightforward, right? I mean, here's the value you want to look up. Here's the range you want to look up and the column. But then there's these things like, do you want to do an exact match or an approximate match? And if you pick exact, it's real easy then. You just put comma 0 and it's going to look for the match and it's going to return it. That's fine. If you do an approximate match, then you have to remember a couple things. One thing you have to remember is they have to be ordered from low to high. That's when you do approximate match. And and the other thing I want to show you is the most critical thing about the VLookup and why it's sort of so bad, it's sort of a bad function, is that the range that you're looking up, or the value that you're looking up, has to be in the leftmost column of this table. So what do I mean by that? I mean, this is why VLookup to me, it's a very bad function, is because this E4, here I want to look up a score, right? And that score is in the leftmost column, but it has to be in the leftmost column. So I have this table here, A4 to B8. If I just rearrange this and I move the scores over here to the right of grade, so now what is the leftmost column of this table? Well, the leftmost column is the grade column, right? So it's this column here. So now let's look at our VLookup, right? So let's make it like we did before, to B8. So now we have the same thing, right? We're looking for 55 in this table, right? But now it doesn't know, because it needs to be the leftmost column, it's going to return an error here. So I'm going to do an exact match, and I'm just going to hit enter, and it's going to be an error because it doesn't know how to look up 55 in the first column because it's not there, because it only looks at this first column, right? So this is critical. So I'll write these down for you. Lookup value needs to be in leftmost column, and then I'm going to write if you use approximate match, i.e. 0, then order low to high. So these two things make, I'll also put approximate match looks for biggest, looks for first smallest number. Okay, so these things make VLookup a very, very bad function to me, because you always need to have what you're looking up in this leftmost column. So let me take this back. I'm just going to drag this back, and I'm going to leave this highlighted here so you keep that in mind. I'm going to take the highlighting off this, and now you could see that, if I change this to B8, so if I hit enter, now I get 55 here. All right. So we're using an exact match here. Let me just let me just move this over real quick. I'm just going to put score, and I want to return the grade, so I'm going to go to the second column here. Okay, there's my grade, right? It looks up this value 55 in this table, and it returns the second column. That's what this is doing. For an exact match, so I'm going to put this over exact match, and then I'm going to highlight this so you can see the difference. And now I'm going to go over here, and notice that VLookup is very flexible in that you can very quickly look up stuff. I mean, that's the whole point of this VLookup, is that, you know, you could have tons and tons of columns, and look how easy it is to just keep looking up stuff. So now let's change this to an approximate match, just so you see again. So I move the table there. What value do I want to look up? Okay, I want to look up 55. And let's see, I want the second column, yes. Now if I want to do approximate match, remember I have to set this to 1, and I hit enter. Now, why is this an error? Remember again, well, one of these 3 points, you have to, if you use approximate match, you have to order lowest to highest. So we need this again. We need 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, lowest to highest, right? Okay, so now we get an approximate match. And just so that you see what's going on here, I'm going to just put 50, 60, 70 here. So when we do an exact match, you're going to see that the grades are going to show up. Okay, so now let's copy down this formula. Okay, so if we copy down just one cell, notice what happens. The table moved, right? So this moved down from E5 or D5 or D4 to D5, and that's good because I don't want to look up 50 now. I want to look up 60. But then there we see a problem here. The table moved. It was A4 to B8 before, and now it moved from 8 to A5 to B9, and that's not good. So we need to move it back up, just drag it back up here, and then we need to make it permanent. So this is something you're going to do a lot. Let me just close that thing. Something you're going to do a lot is because you don't want that table to move. So you got to remember to press, oops, when I press F4 that pops up. Sorry. So how do you make this an absolute? You got to put these dollar signs, right? So you got to remember to do this. Now this is a slow way of doing it, putting the dollar signs in front of the column letter and the row number, but I'm doing that just because my F4 is currently disabled, I guess. Okay, so now when you copy this down, remember, have the absolute reference for your table, your lookup table, and now we see what we want, right? This is exactly what we want. If I do an exact match for the value 60, right here, if I do the exact match for the value 60, which is in cell D5, into this table, remember to put the absolute references around it using the dollar sign so it doesn't move. And I want to return the second column of that table, which is the grade column, and I want an exact match. Well, 60 is a D, and I get a D. Same thing for C. When I dragged it down, it went to D6 here, and it still looks at the permanent located table. And the second column, I get 70 is a C, and I hit enter. It looks up 70 is a C. Very powerful, because you know when you're doing this in real life, this might be on another worksheet. Like you might have 100 worksheets or something. This might be way down there on the edge of your workbook, and you need to look back, you know, through tons and tons of worksheets. And it's very easy to do. You could just select a worksheet column, and you can make that happen. So let's do the same thing here for the approximate match. Again, make this a permanent table and hit enter, and if you just drag this down, oops, there you go. You get a 55 is an F, a 65 is a D, 75 is a C, 85 is a B, 95 is an A. Now notice you're using the same function, VLookup. You have the same, almost the same parameters, except for what? This 0 here, right? And this 1 here. So that's the difference between an exact match and an approximate match. Remember, for approximate match, you need to order the lookup, the leftmost column, you need to order that from low to high, and then you need to know that it's looking for the smallest, or is it looking for the biggest? Let's see. A 55 is an F. Yeah, so it looks for the smallest. It looks for the smaller number. So if you pass in 51, it's going to go to an F. If you pass in 50, it's going to go to an F. Notice that. But watch this. If you pass in 49, it's going to look lower. It's going to say, is there a number in this range lower than 49? And if there is, I'm going to return it. And since there's not, it gives you an error. So that's what you need to be aware of when you do this approximate match. Like I said, 99% of the time, you're going to use this thing. Why do I focus on the approximate? Well, because when you write this thing, you need to know what this parameter is. You really do, because if you don't, you're going to get confused, or you're going to put a 1 in there instead of a 0, and then you might get values that you don't want. So 99% of the time you're going to use this, but you need to be aware of what this thing does. Okay? So you don't do it if you don't want to do it, or if you need to do it, you can do it. Okay, so remember this first point up here. Remember these two, we're dealing with this approximate match over here, these 2 points. This one creates a problem all the time. When you use Excel in real life and you do a VLookup, which you're going to do a million times, all the time, this creates a problem a lot because the data that you want is not always going to be in the leftmost column, right? You might have, let me just bring this grading system down here. And let's say for some reason I cannot drag and move this over here. Like for some reason, someone else's workbook, I get their workbook and they tell me, you know, don't move anything in this workbook. Don't change the order of the columns. You know, the grade is over here and the score is over here, and deal with it. Okay, and just for fun, let's say that they put another column in here. I don't know, text, and I'm just going to put letters in here. So now the grade is 2 columns away from the score. Notice up here again, if that happened up here, if the grade was over here and then there was another column text in here, well, all we would need to do is just change this 2 to a 3, right, to get the grade. So that's how easy that is. You could have 100 columns. You could have 100 columns, 200 columns. Doing a VLookup, it still allows you to look up a value in the leftmost column, and you could grab the 99th column. Like here, I'm grabbing now the 3rd column, right? If I had this table, if it was 99 columns wide and I wanted to grab the last one, I would put in 99. Okay, so let me change this so that you can see that that's the case. Okay, so you could have, remember, this table can be anything. So, and it also can have, you know, a million rows. Doesn't matter. So the table that you look up, just remember that it can have 200 columns and a million rows. But as long as you do something like this, where you keep the table permanent and you put in your column index, you know, the 99th column, you'll be fine. Okay, so now, like I said before, in VLookup, you need to have the leftmost column as your as one of the critical parts of the whole thing to get it to work. If we remember, we saw that if we move this to the 2nd column, it didn't work. So that was a point that we needed to remember. I said that creates problems, and it does. So how do we get around that? How do we get? Let me just do the same thing here. Let's say I want to create a table exactly like the one we had. I want to put the grade here, right? But now instead of using this grading system where I have score on the leftmost column, I want to use this grading system where score is on the rightmost. And it could be in the middle, it doesn't matter. But the point is that it's not in the leftmost. There's something else there. How do we get the grade here? And in this case, you're going to want to use something called a combination of 2 functions, the index function and the match function. Now, what does the index function do? Let me show you real quick. I'll just do it over here. I'll just do it like this. Okay. So the index function, it just returns, you pass in a table. So let's pass in this table, or a range, however you want to call it. And you give it a row number. Down here, you give it a row number. So let's deal with the second row. So I'm going to put 2 in here. So the second row of this table is going to be the row with the D here and the D here and then the 60 here. And then it asks for a column number. So I'm going to pass in the third column. Okay, so that's all the index function does. It takes a range, you pass in a row and a column, and guess what it's going to return? It's going to return whatever element in this range that's located at the second row and the third column. In this case, second row is this one here, and third column is this one here. So it's going to return this 60 because that's the second row, third column element. So there's 60. If I wanted it to return this 90, well, that's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fifth row, 1, 2, 3, third column. So then I would have to change this to fifth row, third column, and now I can get 90. Right? So that's what the index function does. That's very interesting because now we can access any elements of a table because all we need is the row and the column of what we want. So let's think about that for a second. Here I want to get the grade, right? So how would I get the grade out of this table? Well, I told you earlier that I wanted to use the index function, so we can sort of type the index function like it's going to look something like this. You know, index and then equals index. And then what's my table going to be? Well, this is going to be my table. And now I also have to make these permanent again. So that's my table, and the index function wants a row. So what row is 50 in? Well, the score 50 is in the first row, so I'm going to put 1 here. And what column is it in? Well, it's in column number 3, right? 1, 2, 3. So there's going to be our index function, right? If I hit enter, actually no. The column that we want is the first column, right? Because it's the first column has the grade in it, sorry. So I put 1 in there, and now I get what I want up here, right? Same thing, I have 50F. Here I have 50F too, but now I use the index function. Now, you're asking me, well, okay, drag it down. So if I drag it down, wow, I still get F's there. Okay, so here's where we need to use a match function. Why do we need to use a match function? It's because of the row. The row is not changing here. As we drag this down, I go from looking up, you know, it's always 1, 1 in every one of these formulas. Nothing is changing, and that's almost what we want. Everything is good here, and in this expression, you know, this table is never going to change, right? That's our table. The row, well, that has to change. The column is not going to change. Why is the column not going to change? Because the grade is always going to be in the first column, right? So the problem with this, and reason that it's all F's, is that the row number is not changing. So I have to do something about that. How do you make this row number change? Well, then you use the match function. Okay, so here's what we can do. Here's the match function, and this is going to solve a lot of your problems, and you should remember this. If on interviews, this is good if you know this. You should tell people that you know this because it comes up a lot when you do advanced Excel things. When VLookup is not good because of this left, you have to have it in the leftmost column. So you can tell them I know how to use index match to get around it. And also, one thing you should know is that this is much faster than this. It's much faster. So when you have 1,000,000 rows and you put a VLookup into that, it's going to take a long time. It might crash your Excel, whereas this will not crash your Excel most time. I mean, 99% of the time it won't crash your Excel. Okay, so how do we use match function to solve this problem of getting the row number, right? So this match function, what does it do? Let's look at this. The match function, again, it looks up a value. Okay, so let's give it a value. Let's give it 50. And then it looks up an array. Okay, so what is our array going to be? Well, I need to know the row number of 50 in this range here, right? And again, these need to be, well, they don't need to be permanent now, but they will be. Okay, so the row number is, we're going to find that out after we do this match function. So let's get back to that. So the lookup array, we're looking up 50 in this range, and the match type, again, now this looks very similar to what we saw before. Now we have a 1 less than, a 0 exact match, and a -1 greater. 99% of the time you're going to use 0, so I'm going to put 0 here. The 1 and -1 do what we saw up here. It looks up or it looks down. This time it has a 1 for less than and a -1 for greater than. You could play around with the less than and the greater than, the 1 and the -1 in these parameters, but it's going to be doing the same thing that you see up here. They're going to be, when you use the 1 or -1 down here, you're going to have to order this column. If it's not ordered, you're going to get an error. And you're going to have to realize that it's looking for a smaller number below the lookup value or a bigger number above the lookup value. But I'm not going to focus on these 1 and -1 because 99% of the time you're going to use a 0 because you want an exact match. You want to find what row is 50 in. So if I close this and I hit enter, it gives me 1, right? So that's very helpful because now I can go into this formula and I can identify that 50 is in the first row of this range here, and 60 is in the second row of this range, and 70 is in the third row, and 80 is in the fourth, and 90 is in the fifth. And when I do that, now I have something that's going to look like this. For 60, it's going to look like 2, and I'm going to get D there, right? And for 70, it's going to look, my index function is going to look like that with the 3 in there, right? All because of this match function. So let's do that. So here's how you combine them. You would have to do something like this. Match. Now what do you want to look up? Well, I want to look up 50 in this array. And again, let's make this permanent. And you could do this quicker by clicking F4, but I didn't do that yet. So now let's do an exact match of 0, and there is what we have. This is how you do it. For an index match combination, that's going to do the same thing as VLookup. You put the table you want to look up in, which is this blue table here, right? You put what row do you want. That's when you use the match function. The match function is going to return a number, and the number is going to be the row of this value in this array, this purple array, which is C17 to C21. It's going to return what row in this table is 50. It's going to return 1. And when you pass in the first row into this index function, it's going to be looking in this row right here, this row that F is in. So now we're getting real close. We have the table, we have the row we identified, and now we just need to pass in the column. Well, the column is going to be the grade column, so that's going to be 1, right? So now if I hit enter, I get F here. And if I drag it down, all the way down, I get D, and I get C, and I get B, and I get A. And now if we look at that formula and we click on it, you'll see that it's looking up 90 into, it's looking up, the index function looks at the blue range, which is the same blue range, right? It's permanent. And then what row is it looking in? Well, it's using the match function. And what is the match function doing? It's looking at cell E21, which is 90, and it's looking at this purple range here, this range here, and it's saying what row is 90 in. It's in the 5th row. So that's going to be the value of this function right here. It's going to be 5. So you're looking up into that table. You want the 5th row and the first column. Well, what is the 5th row, first column? It's here's the 5th row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's the 5th row. What is the first column? Well, it's A. And if you hit enter, you get A. So that is how you do an index match function that is way better than VLookup. And why is it way better? Again, because if you use Excel at an advanced level, you're going to encounter cases where what you're looking up doesn't have the value, or your lookup table doesn't have what you're looking up in the leftmost column. It might be in the third column or the fifth column or the 100th column, and that's when you use index match. And it's also faster than VLookup, and it will not crash your Excel most times. VLookup crashes your Excel much more often than index match. I mean, I'm talking when you're dealing with millions of rows and things like this. But for a beginner, if you haven't seen this before, you need to know how to do this. So I hope I explained it well. And one last thing is that, this approximate match, how often is it used? I don't think it's used very often. If you want to play around with the approximate match, do that with this match function, because remember we saw that this has 3 options here, but they're doing the same sort of thing, right? And it's critical that when you do that, you have to order them low to high, or if you use greater than, you have to do high to low. So be aware of that. It's when you use approximate match, it gets much trickier. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there. As a recap, if you're new to Excel, if you don't know VLookup, you need to know it. You need to know it for sure if you're doing Excel on a daily basis. If you're going to be trying for a job or getting a job, or you use it at your job that uses Excel, you're going to see things where it's used. But I want you to be aware, I think the most important part of the video is the index match combination function here, and how that works. And you need to know that because you're gonna encounter problems with VLookup eventually if you keep using Excel. So okay, so what I'm gonna do is take this workbook. Remember all the videos that we've done. I'm putting all the things you see in terms of Excel in one workbook, so you can just open up this workbook and see how all these functions work, right? All these logical functions, math functions, and the VLookup index match thing here. So I'm taking this workbook. I am going to put it on excelvbasequel.com. You could download that if you'd like. Remember to go here and contact me if you have questions. And until the next video, I will see you later.